Hi, I'm Lonnie with Lowrance Electronics. Today we're going to be disassembling and reassembling the mount that goes with the new Ghost trolling motor. In order to do this, we'll need some commonly used tools. Our number 2 Allen wrench, number 3, a number 4, a number 5, and also a number 8 Allen wrench. Also, we'll need a set of needle nose pliers, a general use set of pliers, a hammer and a punch, a long bladed screwdriver, as well as a short bladed screwdriver. To start this process, we'll need to open the mount. In order to open the mount, we must trigger the safety latch that sits below the head attachment. In order to do that, we'll simply reach down here with one hand, trigger the latch, and then pull your pull cable. At this point, the mount will open. For demonstration purposes, we've removed the gas spring that would sit between the crutch and the upper mount, simply by removing the 2 nuts and the barrel nuts attaching the gas spring. Before you open your mount, you need to ensure whether or not the gas spring is installed. The gas spring is under pressure, so if the gas spring is still installed, you have the tendency for the upper extrusion to be loaded and maybe kick back and cause injury to the service tech themselves. To open the mount, we'll first need to engage the safety latch. After the safety latch has been engaged, we'll simply pull on the pull cable, opening the mount at that point. Now we'll go over the procedure for opening a mount in the case that it has arrived to you with the pull cable missing or broken. We'll again release the safety latch. At this point, we'll take a long bladed screwdriver, pass through the upper extrusion into the latch guide, and manually remove the latch guide and the pin from the housing, releasing the upper extrusion from the lower. Next, we will be removing the kicker and the side plates. The kicker is easily removed with 2 screws. The kicker must be removed first to access all 3 side plate screws. Once the 2 screws have been removed from the kicker, you can simply set it aside. With the kicker removed, you now have gained access to all 3 side bolts of the side plates. And repeat the process for the other side. Now that the side plates have been removed, next we can remove the wear bearings. In order to remove the wear bearings, we'll use a screwdriver to release the tabs from the lower extrusions. The next step will be removing the latch pin. For correct orientation of the mount, we'll always call the hinge point the rear, making this the left and this the right of the mount. The latch pin is very crucial to where it'll only slide through one direction, always from the left to the right, not compromising the tab in the latch guide itself. you may have to tap the latch pin out. Again, careful to only go from left to right to not break the latch pin guide itself. The next step will be separating the pull cable from the handle itself. We'll use a screwdriver to remove the upper from the lower housing of the handle itself. Once the upper cap has been removed, we'll then use a 2mm Allen wrench to remove the set screws. After the set screws have been removed or backed out, you can simply slide the barrel off of the cable. At this point, allowing the lower housing to slide off the cable itself. Once the handle is removed, you can use a screwdriver to simply push the cable and or broken cable through the latch guide itself. Once the cable's been passed through, you can reach up here and continue to pull the cable from the housing. Keep in mind, the pull cable does consist of a flat washer. If the flat washer is to stay in the housing, you will want to remove that before installing the new cable. Next, we will remove the upper dressing from the upper extrusion. To do that, we'll simply use a 4mm Allen wrench, back out the set screw. Next, we'll use a hammer and a punch to remove the upper dressing cap pin, which will then allow for the upper dressing cap to be removed from the extrusion itself. Next, we will go over the procedures for removing the head adapter. In order to remove the head adapter, the upper pin is held in with 2 E-clips. We'll first need to remove the 2 E-clips. Once the 2 E-clips have been removed, we will drive the pin out at that point. Once the upper pin has been removed, your head adapter will be able to pivot, gaining access to the 3mm set screw that is required to be removed before removing the lower pin. At this point, we'll remove the set screw. After removing the set screw, we'll now remove the E-clip that's also holding the safety latch and nylon washer and spring in place. Once the clip has been removed, next we will drive the pin out. When we remove the pin, our safety latch, nylon washers, and spring will become loose at the same time. At this point, your head adapter will be free from the mount itself.
Good.
In this next step, we'll be removing the latch guide and triggers from the push rod itself. In order to do that, first we will remove the latch guide spring. After the latch guide spring is removed, the latch assembly can be removed. In the earlier video, I showed you the tab. This is a tab that we referred to, and it's very crucial for passing the latch from the left to the right so that we don't compromise the tab. Next, we will be removing the rear push rod pin. To do that, we'll simply grab the two clips and pull the clips away from the pin itself. Once the clips have been removed, we can simply tap out the rod itself. Once the pin has been removed, the push rod will separate from the mount. Next, we'll be removing the upper extrusion from the lower. In order to do that, we'll be removing the rear pivot pins from the housing themselves. Once the nuts and washers have been removed, we can simply tap out the pivot pins themselves. Once the pivot pins have been removed, the upper extrusion will separate from the lower extrusion. Next, we'll be removing the rear latch pin. The rear latch pin is holding the latch and the crutch in place at the same time. To do that, we'll simply thread the pin from the housing and then slide the pin from the extrusion, releasing the crutch and the latch and lower dressing itself. Now we'll begin reassembling our mount. Consult your service manual for torque and thread locker applications. First, we'll start by installing the rear dressing with the latch and the spring itself. Simply slide the rear dressing over the extrusion and let the latch cradle over the housing itself. Next, we will put our crutch into place. After the crutch has been installed, we'll pass the rear latch pin through the extrusion, the crutch, the latch, again, at this point, we would apply a thread locker and check your specifications for torque as we tighten the rear latch pin. Now that the latch pin and crutch has been installed, we'll now install the upper extrusion. When installing the upper extrusion, please note that your bushings and the lower extrusion and your upper extrusion are all in place. Next, we will install the rear pivot pins. The pivot pins may need to be tapped into place. Once the pivot pins have been installed, we'll apply our flat washers and nuts. Again, consult your service manual for specific torque and thread locker application. Next, we'll be installing the push rod and the push rod pivot pin. Remembering to get your crutch as you pass through the push rod. Once the push rod pivot pin has been installed, please note that the flat spots are in the orientation to accept the push rod clips. Next, we'll be installing the latch guide assembly. If you had to replace the triggers, they simply clip on the latch assembly itself. Keeping in mind that the tab has not been broken or missing from the latch guide assembly itself. The latch guide assembly will simply free float inside the housing. Before returning the latch guide into its full position and in reinstalling the spring, this is a good time to reinstall the pull cable. Again, ensure that the pull cable has its flat washer that's necessary for proper operation. At this point, the latch guide assembly can be passed into the housing. Now we'll reinstall the spring that holds the latch guide assembly in place. Next, we'll be reinstalling the head adapter. With the head adapter pivoted forward, we'll now grab the pin. The pin has a flat spot to where the set screw will set. When installing the pin, remember we will need the roller, the nylon washer, the safety latch, the spring, and also the last nylon washer. Once your safety latch, spring, and washers have been installed, you can now put your set screw in. Now that you have your set screw in place, the last thing you'll want to do is install your C-clip holding your safety latch in place. And then also check the operation of your safety switch to make sure you have the spring orientation correct. At this point, you will pass your pull cable up through the hole in the head assembly itself. Next, we will reinstall the upper extrusion to the head assembly. using the pin that we removed from the first step. And last, we will replace the two C-clips holding the pin in. Once the clips have been installed, we can now reassemble our pull cable handle. We'll pass the lower part of the handle onto the cable, reinstall our barrel, and then reinstall our set screws. Again, check torque and thread locker specifications for this. Now that your set screws are tight, you can pop the top cap on. Next, we will put our latch in, keeping in mind the orientation and the cutout in the latch itself needs to correspond with the tab inside the latch housing. Ensuring that the pin is installed correctly will allow for the tab to retain the latch itself. When installing the pin, we will go from the left to the right, also keeping in mind that the pull cable washer has not compromised your path. Once the pin has been installed, you can ensure that the tab is seated. Next, we will install the rear dressing cap and the dressing cap pin. And securing it with the set screw. Now you can install your side covers. Again, ensuring proper torque and thread locker application. Once your side covers have been installed, you can now reinstall your wear bearings by simply popping them into place. And at this point, you can reinstall your kicker. Next, to ensure proper function of your mount, you would want to test that it latches and unlatches properly. And with that, your mount is reassembled.